webinar convened by Leadership Magazine in conjunction with SAP Africa, who of kindly sponsored this particular event. We really appreciate the collaboration in this case, as well between the public sector and the private sector in moving our country forward. One of the biggest challenges faced by all of society is how we migrate to a more digital economy, especially given the COVID situation that has faced the world over the last almost 2 years. And so today we're talking about how we can bring digital transformation into the continent, especially in relation to the public sector. And that's really what we're going to be tackling. We have the honor of having the Minister of Public Service and Administration, Minister Ayanda Dlodlo, who's going to be opening this particular session with her remarks. We will then thereafter have a range of discussions with panelists. Mpomodzizi, who's a public sector and health specialist from SAP Africa, Sunil Jenis, who is the Director of Global Government Affairs, as well as corporate social responsibility at SAP Africa, as well as the Professor Kanyani, who is the Dean at the University of Venda, who will also share some of his wisdom in this regard. Of course, the audience joining online will also be posing questions throughout the webinar. Without any waste of time, let me invite Minister Ayanda Dlodlo to address this webinar. Over to you, Minister.
Thank you very much, JJ, and also thank you to the sponsors of this webinar, to my fellow panelists, and also to the esteemed guests that are on the program, including everyone else, which is the ladies and the gentlemen who have decided to grace us with their presence here. The importance of ICT can never be overemphasized, given that it knows no boundary and distance. This is explained through our ability to participate at this very event and or watch live news and other events occurring across the globe, irrespective of distance or time of the day. For many governments around the world, improving digital government services is top priority, and in South Africa, government is not an exception. Digital government holds a grand promise to society, namely for openness, transparency, innovativeness, agility, driven by the needs of its citizens. We in South Africa have a set vision in the National Development Plan to achieve a digital government by 2030, but I must also hasten to state that the idea of leveraging ICT systems to improve governance efficiency and service delivery first emerged with the e-government strategy that was developed by the Department of Public Service and Administration in 2002. And since then, we have shared this with quite a number of countries across the continent. The e-government strategy places emphasis on ensuring quality management in the delivery of public services. And furthermore, the strategy has 3 phases that deal with: 1, access to information on government services; 2, implementation of web-enabled two-way transactions; and the third being the multi-purpose and personalized services. As we all know, since then, several public sector ICT policy frameworks as well as programs were implemented over the years. I don't have to tell the forum about the successes and failures, except to concede that we as government truly have a long way to go. Ladies and gentlemen, there are numerous challenges facing the public sector ICT in South Africa and the rest of the continent. And these include, but are not necessarily limited to, competing socio-economic priorities, expensive connectivity costs, inadequate alignment of policies, mandates, priorities between various departments, and some mandates on ICT, inadequate ICT skills, particularly in the areas of ICT security, solution systems development, business systems analysis, and other skills of the future. The lack of or inadequate universal access to ICT by the public service communities, with mainly service delivery points like schools, health facilities, police stations, and others having none or limited access to ICT connectivity. And I'm sure all of you sitting around this table will attest to the problems that we have experienced in trying to facilitate, to access some of our services through ICT. Outdated culture in the public service of working through manual paper-based processes instead of embracing technology. And in some instances, this is precipitated by the fear of technology and the fear that technology would replace instead of complementing people's jobs. Inadequate ability to share data and information, but also to integrate systems across the public service. And during the pandemic, we saw this firsthand, which led to some people double dipping from the limited resources made available by government as part of the intervention against the burden posed by the pandemic. Misaligned business processes within and between departments, leading to citizens having to move from one department to another to fulfill their requirements, instead of having a one-stop system that caters for all of the needs of citizens that have to be delivered to them by government in a more streamlined way. Back-end business processes in the public sector must eliminate such a burden on parents who have to, for instance, on children who are born in health facilities, that they must still approach the South African social security agents to apply for the social grant benefit when Home Affairs is at hospitals to ensure that children are registered at the site of birth. Outdated service delivery models that rely on brick and mortar service points that are concentrated in urban and semi-urban areas and operate between 7 and 5, even for inquiry on services and renewal of permits and licenses and stuff like that. And in many years that I have been in the public service, I know only too well the many attempts to address these challenges, which never seem to take us very far. And some of you in the round table would actually attest to that, because you actually do assist and provide services to us through contractual arrangements. The challenges I've outlined above point to the nature of the beast called the public sector in general, not just the public service, which is highly bureaucratized, risk-averse, hostile in new ways of doing things, and we stifle innovation because it takes us out of our comfort zones. We are quick to identify that we fail instead of embracing learning through our failures. But we also are not tolerant of failure and do not understand that sometimes failure is one way of learning to do things better. In Africa, some of the most successful solutions are those we have built or innovated ourselves based on our needs, and the future for public service digital transformation, I dare say, lies in frugal and open innovations. Frugal in a sense that we must deliver with limited financial resources and very limited physical and ICT infrastructure, but also open because we need to source innovations from the youth in our communities who have a better understanding of emerging technologies, but also understand the lived experiences of the communities that we serve. In an open innovation approach, this will allow the public sector to allow for service delivery solutions through ideas, through crowdsourcing, ideas contested, leader user workshops, hackathons, and techathons. This will also provide opportunities for joint development of new technologies and innovations through cooperation with private sector partners and citizens. In 2018, as some of you would remember, I hosted government's biggest public sector hackathon in partnership with Geek Culture and the University of Johannesburg. The National Public Sector Hackathon had about 200 young innovators from all over the country, including neighboring countries, who came up with groundbreaking solutions for public sector health challenges and also in education. I understand that since then, a lot of government organizations have embraced this concept and that the culture of open innovation is slowly taking root in our public service, although the uptake is not significant in scale. We are, however, still faced with the challenge that the adoption, diffusion, and replication of these incredible innovations across the public sector continue to be stifled by regulatory barriers and other types of challenges that speak to the non-existent culture of innovation in the public sector. This is a challenge we intend in serious ways and more than one, because it lies at the heart of digital transformation. So for today, I choose to share my observations on what I have seen succeed, with the hope that it will inspire us to think differently about the type, scale, and focus of our digital transformation programs. I will glean from my experience with GovChat, which I think all of you would know about, an initiative I had the opportunity to watch grow as part of the Open Government Partnership, which I led for many years in South Africa. Because for me, it truly has all the hallmarks of a truly transformational digital initiative. The unique features in government for me are building for access, co-creation, and collaboration. And on building for access, I think we can all agree that when we talk of technological innovations in the continent, we must concede that off-the-shelf solutions do not always work. With due respect to our colleagues from the big tech companies, we have bought a lot of these solutions at exorbitant prices, and today they are white elephants in our institutions because they were not created with our own unique requirements in mind, and we just bought them, not taking into consideration our environment and the needs of our people. Building for access simply means understanding, firstly, that in South Africa and the rest of the continent, the cost of data is a major inhibitor, and especially here in South Africa, to access, and so creating public sector solutions that are affordable or zero-rated is non-negotiable. Secondly, we need innovative technologies that provide services across different platforms, responding to citizens' needs, so that here leveraging on social network applications as well as progressive web application becomes important. You all agree with me that even in the private sector, applications with the best tech features sometimes do not gain traction because they are not accessible to the target market due to cost. Co-creation is also important in public sector digital transformation. Governments and solution developers need to work with citizens to define the features required in the technological solutions to address their service delivery needs. That way, the public sector is responsive to the actual needs where it matters most. In the digital transformation journey, governments cannot do it on their own. We need to encourage different types of partnerships in order to leverage the financial resources and skills in the private sector and the community reach of civil society organizations. And I must say, GovChat has been able to tick all the boxes. As I was talking about co-creation, collaboration, and building for access, it ticks all the boxes to a point where a lot of African countries and some countries in Asia have now invited them to help them to create their own technologies that would speak to the needs of their people and the needs of their governments. I'd like to leave it at that. I could continue and go on the whole day, but because of time pressure, I would like to stop here to give others an opportunity to talk. I hope I did make sense. Sometimes I know I don't, but a lot of the time I do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. I think that was truly great. Thank you for taking the time to really put together something that will spark a lot of discussion here. One of my big takeaways from two things. One is the issue of co-creation, because government is bombarded, I can imagine, with tenders and unsolicited proposals of all sorts of systems, as you are correctly saying. And then also that will then also, then the second thing you raised is the issue of the cost of that, to say new solutions equal to massive cost half the time. And then you have the issue of white elephants. I hope our colleagues from SAP or from SAP will sort of tackle that as well in terms of how they plan to mitigate some of the things that you've raised. But without wasting time, Sunil, the stage is yours in response to what the minister said and some of your own ideas. And then we'll also then ask the professor. And I see Percy also has from SAP. Welcome there, Percy. Over to you, Sunil.
Thank you very much, JJ. Honorable Minister Dlodlo, fellow speakers, it's a pleasure and honor to be here today. Madam Minister, I'm so happy that you started off by making reference to the 2002 initial strategy on e-government that was put together. Noting, JJ, that I was in the Department of Public Service and Administration at the time. So it brought back memories, you know, of all the consultations that happened and so on. But thanks very much, Minister, for giving a very candid sort of assessment of both the upsides and the downsides of the digital environment for the public sector. Madam Minister, fellow presenters, the audience, you know, in recent times, I was invited to participate in the UN e-government expert group meeting, which is the UN e-government survey has been in place for many years. And the interesting thing in the most recent report, you remember last year they didn't have one coming out because of COVID. It made references to African countries. And I wanted to touch on a few things here just to show us that although as Africans from time to time we criticize ourselves, at the end of the day, if we really rack and stack ourselves, we're not doing that badly around the world. So, you know, although we have a low penetration of internet, as the minister has mentioned, we are at 36%, and that digital literacy is a challenge. South Africa is one of the continent's leaders, and it topped the list of African countries in the 2021 Digital Quality of Life Index, which basically measures countries on 5 aspects: digital life, internet affordability, the quality of internet, e-infrastructure, e-security, and e-government. And I think that is a big feather in the cap of the country, although we still have some distance to go generally in terms of evolving further. Now, what COVID has shown us, and the minister made mention of that as well, is that citizens have increasingly been exposed to private sector developments, which enable their lives to become somewhat easier from a digital perspective. And it is totally natural for citizens to then transfer that thinking to say, if the private sector can give us that type of service, we should expect it from the public sector as well. After all, we pay taxes, and the public sector does have a fiscus from which to draw from to reach those levels of digital sort of capacity. And with data becoming, when I talk about data, I'm talking about data points per se, becoming critical, we say that data is the new gold of the 21st century, because within that lies so much of information that government has at its hands. Now, in terms of the UN e-government survey, and I'm utilizing that because it does take into account a number of African countries, I wanted to touch on a few things which I believe are quite relevant for us today in this conversation piece. In terms of evaluating the position of a country in terms of its capacity to be digitally transformed, they look at a number of areas. First of which is national portal features, and these include things like, does a government have a generic South African government portal? Is it accessible? How does it flow? How many clicks does it take you to reach certain information? And that's rather basic. And then it also looks at matters of institutional, legal, and policy. And I was very happy to hear the minister touch on these key points in her address. Then what the e-government survey also does, it looks at transactional online services, where you're able to conduct a payment, for example, And there they look at matters such as water and gas, electricity, where the rubber hits the road sort of things. And that would refer more to sort of local government. And last but not least, they look at specific sectors. One of the most highly weighted areas in terms of digital transformation today is the ability for governments to service the vulnerable groups. These are persons with disabilities, the youth, women in particular. We know that South Africa has some of the highest femicide rates in the world. People living in poverty, we have the highest Gini coefficient in the world in South Africa. And many other sort of countries in Africa also are straddled with these challenges. Now, taking all of this into account, it does make the complexity of the digital transformation journey for governments more complicated than would be the case of a private sector. Simply because the constituents that government is dealing with varies from different LSM levels. There's issues of access, which we mentioned earlier, which also pose to be a problem. Now, on the positive upside, what we've seen is now the African trade agreement has been signed, and the African Union has put that in place, which will mean that there'll be additional trade that will take place between countries within Africa. And therein also lies a huge opportunity for the digital transformation journey of African countries, because there will have to be checks and balances in terms of the trade that happens, and this will have to be digital. Issues of revenue management, the typical institutions like your tax and revenue management organizations, they will have a more critical role to play, because that adds currency into the actual fiscus. And then as we move along at that continuum, we can consider the sophistication of utilizing new technologies, the likes of more aggressive artificial intelligence. Now, whilst I'm not going to delve into the actual report, I noted yesterday that the European Union has released a report on the use of artificial intelligence for public service. And to a large extent, it's speaking positively of the ability to make public services much more efficient from that perspective. And then last but not least, the general life of the citizen should be at the center of what we do. And that's where matters of design become critical in the way services are designed. And we talk here about human-centered design, the use of design thinking to establish this. Now, I'm going to just veer a little bit off the actual technology discussion to talk about the structure of the public service. And we know we have the senior management service, which caters for people from the director to the director general level. This is the management engine room of the public sector. And it's critical that these key officials are empowered to make decisions around digital transformation, empowered to be able to align their processes to use the capacity of the digital era to become much more efficient. And on the sort of parallel to that, you have the university or the government entity, which previously you would have called it SAMD. Now it's become an entity that takes care of education. They're in the curriculum of the institution, with keeping in mind we're in the 21st century. It's quite important that the curriculum includes the digital transformation journey and the understanding of public servants themselves about the value that digital can bring, so that it doesn't become a fear factor. Because in lots of cases, the 21st century scares people because of the rate and the exponential rate at which digital transformation is happening. We know that technology is doubling now almost every 8 to 9 months. The capacity of technologies is doubling, and that creates a difficulty with keeping up to speed. But the basics are very much still there. So JJ, I will pause at that point and hand back the microphone to you, as so to speak, and to allow other speakers to also input on these matters. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sunil. I hope you can hear me. I'm having
hear you.
A little bit of difficulty. Yes, thank you very much. I'm glad that there's a lot of passion coming through, and I hope that that would translate beyond the webinar? In other words, one hopes you could reach out to the minister to raise some of the issues that you have tabled that could certainly, support all that they are setting themselves for as a government for their agenda. Before I go back to Percy, who's your colleague there, Sunil, I will maybe go to the University of Venda, then talk to the Prof to see what he thinks. Prof, what do you think of what's being said? I mean, one of the big issues is whether or not the issue of digitization has become a lot more academic, given the 4IR, and one of your colleagues, Professor Marawa at UJ, was heading the 4IR commission. I would want to know what connection there is to that, in your view, but also that this whole thing is not academic anymore. It actually become a way of doing business. And so in the public sector, it also has to be a way of doing business. Otherwise, there'll be this dislocation or a disjuncture between what the public sector is doing and what the private sector can deliver. Prof, your words of wisdom?
Yes, thank you, Dr. JJ Tabane, and also acknowledging our Honorable Minister. And I think all protocol observed. I'm just going to be very brief, but I'm just going to be reacting to the, the overview of what the minister has just said. And I really appreciate the honesty of the minister in talking the realities that we are exposed to in South Africa and as well as in the continent. And you are right, Dr. J. Tabane, that the matters of digital transformation should not be academic and being reduced as talks in the boardroom, but do some kind of reality checks, and you're able to understand that even the strategy that the minister is talking about that has been crafted, to me, I think often at times, South Africa is very good in developing policies and in developing strategies, but we find that those strategies, beautiful as they are not followed through. And as a result, at the end of the day, they get overtaken by the events. And we perhaps want to appreciate the short-change landscape because of the COVID, which I think is now forcing us back to what we could have done aggressively when these strategies were launched even 10 years ago. So from the point of departure, acknowledging that there are some kind of digital divide in South Africa, looking at the access and the affordability of these services. And if we even go to the extent of making sure that these services are automated and accessed, it's still gonna leave us in the same disparities where we find that those who are able to afford these services will enjoy them at the expense of the members of the community who are underprivileged and cannot able to access these services. So when the minister is talking about zero rating some of these access to these services, I'm very excited about it. But to be realistic, I think the starting point is, and I know that we are all excited about digital society, which is very good. Like as my colleague has just said, that we really have an appetite to get into these spaces, but we need a collective approach, and we need an aggressive interventions. And digital transformation requires of us to understand the digital society. We should be able to say we are creating the society of the future, of the present and the future. And it requires of a policy shift. Examples and reference is a Silicon Valley. We can even create our own Silicon Valley in Africa. Example is a small country like Estonia, which right from 1994, they were very intentional and aggressive in policy shift, policy implementation, and as I'm speaking today, 99% of the services are automated. And then the question that we ask ourselves, of course, we cannot even be comparable with these maybe technologically advanced countries. But if we are beginning, all of us getting together in this space of aggressively shifting the landscape, I think we should be talking something else than to always be academic, which bring disparities. A case in point is better services in different departments. You can talk about SARS, where you're talking e-filing, we are there online. Better services are on this Sandral, which is the e-tolling, which we don't like. But if we transport those digital solutions and make them to become prototyped in all the departments, become aggressive collective, so that departments don't introduce solutions in silos which are not integrated. And that is where we have a problem, because currently we were exposed to renewal of driver's license, for example. And my question is, where is this efficient digital solution in other departments that are lacking in other departments? Municipalities are in shambles. And I think if we begin to get an integrated approach, Dr. Tabane, I think we will have a progress as we journey on this digital society. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. I'm conscious of time, and I would like to have the minister to give us one more bite before she goes. So I'm going to ask Minister to speak before I get the other panelists to come in, because otherwise we will have to let you go without saying anything more, Minister. Your response, Minister, to what the colleagues have raised, quite interesting things that have come in from the Prof. In particular, I underline the issue of joint approach, a joint approach, because no point in the left hand being digital and the other hand being, I don't know whether we say analog, without subjecting the long awaited digital migration. But of course, that's not your problem now. You are no longer Minister of Communications. Minister?
Thank you very much, JJ. You see, even if I'm not Minister of Communication, unfortunately, the Public Service Act says that the minister is responsible for establishing norms and standards for information management in the public service and also electronic government. I'm responsible for transformation and reforms. So it's still, a lot of work that I still need to do. But the issues that have been raised by Professor Kanyane are very, very interesting, Dr. Tabane. He calls on the implementation of our good policies and strategies. Sometimes we are very short on doing exactly that, on grand policies and strategies that are hailed by all and sundry. And had we implemented on some of these strategies and policies, we would have been light years away in terms of being on par with other countries and even surpassing other countries and be ahead of the pack. And COVID would have found us in a much better position where we would have been so much more prepared to work from home and to work remotely. Sunil raised an issue about SAMD, and which is now called, it just shows how much of a fossil you are, Sunil. It's now called the National School of Government. And our curriculum has changed and it has transformed and grown exponentially over the years. One of the things that we are doing is that at the back of the cabinet approved digital future skills strategy, the DPSA and the National School of Government has finalized developing a training intervention for the government information technology officers, which you would call CIOs, in the public service. And training and awareness intervention is required for the senior executive managers, as you correctly say, with the focus on endless possibilities and opportunities, as well as challenges presented by digital transformation in the public service. So that work is already underway. The other point that I'd also like to raise on something that Sunil had also spoken about, and I had jotted all of these things down, is the updating of the services.gov, eservices.gov.za portal, to ensure that the public is able to transact remotely with the public service. So that is underway. The portal is there. The portal needs a lot of work to develop it further, but it is work in progress. And as you had correctly said earlier on, it's not as doom and gloom as sometimes we make it out to be. It's just that as South Africans, and I stand accused as well, we are very hard on ourselves. We set standards that sometimes are really impossible, and we hold ourselves to those standards that we have set that are impossible, whilst everybody seems to think that we are actually doing not as badly as we think we are. The other one that I had wanted to bring to your attention is that a public service-wide governance mechanism is required to curb wastage and inadequate benefits value from ICT investment. I would not want to raise the name of a company here, but there is a system that was bought by government that is costing us so much that I have constantly refused as the department to be a pilot in its implementation, because it just does not serve what I would want to see of a package that deals with all things public service related. The other thing is, again, on the issue of wastage. The Department of Home Affairs has got IDs, it's got birth certificates, it's got this certificate, it's got that certificate. The Department of Transport has got a driver's license, it's got this, it's got the education. They all have their own licenses. They all have their own documents that speak to an individual from cradle to grave. Why is it that we don't have one document that is updated periodically as you grow from cradle to grave, and save all of this money, but invest in the upgrade of your digital information portals and platforms, so that there is nothing that is missed in between the growth milestones of an individual? Why is it that we have a tender going out for your smart ID and another tender going out for your driver's licenses? It just does not make sense. The amount of wastage is phenomenal. It's unbelievable. I don't know at what point this will end. But while this complement or be complemented by department-specific governance arrangements, the mechanism must be able to assess and advise on big ICT initiatives even before more funds are spent on successful projects. And also the fact that the public service regulations are currently under review and numerous proposals have been made. This is happening. It's going to involve the unions. At some point, we're going to have to talk to NETLEC as well. But for me, one of the biggest things that we need to be looking at, Dr. Tabane and my fellow panelists, is a cybersecurity legislation. We do not have that. We've got a cyber crimes law, which was separated from the cybersecurity legislation because the private sector had certain problems around that. We need to go back to that. There are so many problems as we advance technologically, as we go digital. The hybrid wars are fought on those platforms, and we will become so much more vulnerable. So cybersecurity legislation must be passed as a matter of extreme urgency, and we would request that the private sector comes on board and embraces the work that we're attempting to do. Thank you very much, Ngiyabonga kakhulu. It has been an awesome few minutes, and I hope this is not the end of our interaction on digital transformation related matters. Thank you so much. I have to be running in about 5 minutes, otherwise I will lose my job, Dr. Tabane.
Thank you, Minister. I'm just going to ask Pesili Toaba from SAP to be the one to thank you on our behalf, and as he makes remarks, and then we will release you at 1:45 promptly, so that you keep your job so we can interact with you further. Pesi, you've got the floor.
JJ, thank you so much. Thank you so much, and I think to everyone as well. Honorable Minister, I think absolute thanks. I think for the remarks, for the words that you have given. I have taken notes. I'm not sure if you saw that I was busy scribbling. My book is almost full. I think there are a lot of things that you mentioned about the work that government is doing in the space. I think the biggest thing that resonates with me is the absolute appreciation of where the issues are. And I think also to look at where are some of those pockets of success and opportunities. We definitely look forward to an ongoing engagement with you and government and your department on how we can continue to support you to drive this. I think one of the key things that you mentioned, and it really resonates with me, the issue of reduction of wastage in public sector, where we're definitely starting to look at solutions that are fit for purpose. So we need to move away from that whole notion that we continue to dump technology on government, but it is about putting ourselves as citizens before we put ourselves out as private individuals and organizations. To then say the hard-earned money that we spend on a government fiscus, what is the value that we help government to achieve? So I think from our side, there's SAP definitely committed to work this journey with you, and we definitely are looking forward to much further and brighter engagements. There's a lot that we want to cover, but I think I do appreciate the urgency and that you have to run, but just thank you so much from us.
Thank you. Thanks.
Please be at ease and all the best with what you are doing. Once again, Minister, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time and you coming to be of use to this particular webinar, and we will follow up so that this doesn't end in the air. Thank you so much, and you are released to leave.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation as well. Appreciate it.
Wonderful. Ayanda Dlodlo, the Minister of Public Service and Administration, always generous with her time, and today no exception. Now, with the remaining time, I would like us to, Pesi, I'm going to give you again to just, in a sense, give a sense of what do you think are the things we can tackle going forward, and how can we ensure that stuff that's discussed here, I mean, we've had very interesting inputs already from all the other panelists, stuff that we have talked about here can be pursued further so that, you know, it doesn't become just another talk shop. But of course, I'm not dictating what else you can contribute. It's your turn, and I will then get the other panelists to respond to you. Please take the floor again, please.
Super, thank you, JJ. I think maybe the first thing that I want to pick, it's I think that there is a contradiction in term, I think, with something that the minister mentioned. We continue to refer to an e-government strategy that was developed in 2002. We're sitting in 2021. Technology has evolved so much through the years. So one of the key things that I think we always try to espouse, digital transformation is always around the aspect of fail fast, learn fast, but deliver fast. So if we continue to want to drive digital transformation in the old realm of what defined a 2002 strategy, then there is a misconnection that we have. But what we then want to start looking at is to then say, how do we as as the private sector in this instance, SAP, coming through and say, how do we work with our partner ecosystem? How do we work with government? But really to enable government to deliver critical services. Because for me, it's always that says, at the back of what digital transformation drives, always has to be the why. So when an organization undertakes a digital transformation program, it is about specific outcomes that that particular organization is looking at. Public sector is driven around simply by the need to improve citizen experience and public service. So we then need to then say, if that is the outcome that we're driving, what are the right technology ingredients that we need to have put in place? Because technology in itself is just an enabler, but technology is not the panacea of what digital transformation is. We definitely see a number of opportunities that we have. I mean, I think the professor mentioned the SANRAL as one example. He mentioned SARS as some of those examples. So Neil mentioned COVID. Those are the pockets of excellence that really showed us what focused and dedicated digital transformation can deliver in the public service. We now need to look at it and say, what are the opportunities in the other spheres of government, where we really bring this together cohesively to make sure we deliver to the good of the government. I mean, the cradle to grave story that the minister mentioned, I started hearing that in 1990s when I started working, but it's still a concept that we need to work towards. So the main thing that we have is around breaking the silos in government, because what you want to do as a citizen is providing my information to government once, so that we have that whole thread of information and data across government. And how do we then make it more easy for people to engage with government? When we look at SARS in particular, the biggest, I think, success for SARS was around how do they make it easy for people to engage and for people to be compliant. So no longer are they asking you to complete 100 pages of documents. SARS now actually tells you what your assessment is, and you have to agree to it or not. If you do, you get paid the next day. And those are the efficiencies that we need to start looking at in government. And I think collectively as a panel, and I think the participants on this particular webinar, is for us to start thinking around what are those successes that we really want to make sure that government achieves. Because like Sunil also mentioned, we have deep pockets of success. And while we continue to beat ourselves because we have the capability, we have the infrastructure, we have the technology know-how, but it is about how do we really make sure that we turn the needle. And that I think is where we need to be able to change the narrative and to really make sure that we drive our focus.
Yeah. Thank you, Percy. I think that's quite useful. I was wondering on the e-government situation, because I think that's the heart of the matter. The fact that the minister mentioned that strategy, it means that somehow it's still in play, and it may well be in play while it's out of date. I'm not sure whether anyone here could be able to comment on that as we continue the discussion, whether or not maybe there's a need to almost have a stock taking of that e-government strategy and say, given the new reality now, what are things we can keep there? What are things that government should rather change in that regard? Also, I didn't get an answer from the minister about, or from the prof for that matter, about where does this leave the 4IR Commission? There was a big song and dance about the 4IR Commission. And I have to assume that somehow that 4IR Commission has to speak one way or another to the e-government strategy. Otherwise, it will look like a parallel situation that's got nothing to do with the reality that government is facing every day. I don't know whether Mpo is on the line, but Mpo, if you are there, you can take the stage with your remarks.
Yes, I am, JJ, and thank you for the introduction, Dr. JJ. Good afternoon to my colleagues on the call, and thank you for that. And I think really coming back to what Percy is saying is that technology is not the end-all, be-all solution, right? If we have to think about this in the broader context, is that there's a people element, there is a process element, there is a governance element, and it's all underpinned and enabled by technology in itself. And all these factors need to work together in order to mitigate some of the key challenges that was raised by the Honorable Minister around the risk-averse nature of government to undertake new innovative solutions into resolving the current problem. I think one thing that we have to agree is that if we continue doing the same things in the same way and expecting a different outcome, then we're all encouraging a trend of insanity, because we'll never get a different outcome. The truth of the matter is that things have changed to how we used to work and how we engage. In my aspect, my mom is a teacher. She's been an educator now for almost over 30 years. And now, even in her 30 years, she's still learning, because as part of her grade 2 curriculum, she's teaching robotics and she's teaching coding, something that she herself is now learning in her old age, and is now imparting that kind of knowledge onto our students and our future generations. And it just goes to show the paradigm shift in what's happened in how we are adopting technology. It's no longer just a buzzword, the digital transformation effort. It's actually embedded in how it is that we work and engage today. The likes of platforms like TikTok, I mean, everybody now is on social media. And it's very fun. We also actually have one of the highest mobile phone and record numbers in the world, right? We're one of the countries in the world that use the most smart mobile phones and the most expensive mobile phones in the world. And that gives us access to a plethora of engagement applications that can help us drive some of the key changes that we'd like to see in this respect. And we should be taking advantage of some of these things. I think something that Percy also mentioned is that government really needs to unpack the why, which what we term in our world is as value management. We really need to understand what is the actual outcome or the solve for problem that we're trying to resolve and work towards that. The Honorable Minister mentioned the fact that we are not tolerant of failure. It can't be, not in today's world. We have to fail fast, learn fast, and deliver fast, as what Sunil said. And these are some of the things that we need to come to the forefront and have a discussion with not just the technology piece within government, but as well as other aspects of service delivery that exist within the government institutions. This conversation has gone beyond just the CIO table. It's gone beyond just the technology director and management table. It's gone across the business. And this is something where we need to be looking at what are the key service delivery and citizen expectation outcomes that we want to deliver. How do we go about driving that delivery, and the levers in which we need to pull, including the use and adoption of technology in order to deliver on those outcomes, as Percy mentioned, right? The times of us using transformation, innovation, digital as buzzwords, I think is quite over. It's time now that we take stock of what we have. We understand the delta in between and what it is we need to achieve. And we work on a solid execution plan, as what the Prof has mentioned, that we've got amazing plans. We've got great strategies. The crux of it comes at the execution level to ensure that we are able to do more with less. And it brings me to my last point, JJ, is that we don't have to fix the world, right? We don't have to be the answer and all be all to everything. We need to pick specifically 1 to 3 key items that we're trying to solve for. We need to agree what levers we need to pull, and then we need to track the progress on how we're able to deliver on those outcomes. Whether failure or success, the key thing is that there will be a lesson learned, there will be innovation adopted, and there will be a move forward. There will be progress in that respect. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Truly appreciate that input. And that's what I was also calling for, to say, even in this webinar, if we live here, we should live here with 1 or 2 action points that says, if we are to make this webinar useful, what are the sort of things we need to do post this to trigger this discussion on a broader scale? Follow up with the ministry. Maybe they would be interested to talk to us about what needs to be done. We must never take our input of this nature for granted or believe it's happening elsewhere by other people. It may well not be happening at all, and she may be thinking, sitting there as minister, battling with what she must do next. So I think the conversation needs to continue. want to give each of you, in that regard, an opportunity to almost give me one thing, the one thing that you believe must be done going forward that can add value to this conversation, so that we can have a basis for a follow-up discussion of one way or another. Sunil, let me start with you.
Yeah, I think you asked the question. I think we can include these two things. The one is a refresh of the e-government strategy. Now, people talk about, we had e-government, then we have digital government, and now we have something called intelligent government, right? It's basically different evolutions of the concept of e-government. But that strategy needs to be relooked. Within that, I think we're quite aware of some of the embarrassments some governments have experienced, where the national portals have been hacked, for one, to speak of. And I think the aspect of potentially convening a workshop, which is supported by both private and having public sector key individuals involved, to shape also this cybersecurity strategy, to look at the laws and see how that strategy can actually be put in the form of regulations, and how that could be embedded, not in a form of looking at vendor, it must be vendor agnostic. That's what I'm saying, in being put together. So I would suggest that I want to leave one third factor, which I'm still going to harp on, because I see this, and the minister mentioned that I'm a fossil because I mentioned somebody. But the truth is, this school of government really has to become like a central agency of government to prepare public servants at that level to be able to utilize the capacity of digital transformation. It makes no sense, as we say in the old past days, if you have a nice website in the back, you're running around with the paper in your hand from one office to the other. So that speaks to processes. These three items I mentioned are very much linked. And I do think that South Africa, the South African government in particular, needs to take this UN e-government survey very seriously. The reason is this: lots of countries are now, when I say not even countries, lots of investors are looking at this UN e-government survey, and they're looking at where countries fall on this. Because if countries fall well in the top 10%, top 15%, the chances of getting investment by international corporations and foreign direct investment, it increases greatly. So the South African government has got to look at that, because that is a de facto standard that's been there for the last 20 years. And against that, they could be doing some tweaks in the background to ensure that they continuously, jumping up that ladder per se. So I know it's more than one thing I've spoken about, JJ, but this is a complex issue. But I thought these sort of four drivers that I mentioned would be key to come out of this.
Can I ask you, Sunil, before I move on to other panelists, whether or not you feel that there has not been space to do these things you are saying? For example, the revision of a e-government strategy. You know how defensive government is. When you come to something and say you want to revise, they say, who are you? Why are you coming to tell us what to do? How would you suggest that gets approached? Because one way of doing this is to maybe SAP initiates a workshop, a small workshop, endorsed by the minister. Hopefully she'll be the minister there much longer, and not now having to deal with another minister. And then maybe invite business organizations like BUSA, BBC, and the likes, right? So that it becomes a business government engagement, even if it's initiated by us. Because like I say, we are the people who are waiting for. Because if you wait, in a year's time, you'll still be talking and nobody would have convened the thing. Your views about the approach there, because I really would hate for this to just be a talk shop, because we could write from this, because it's still fresh in the minister's head, to say, following the webinar and so on, we think we should co-convene a workshop, and we would think you should invite School of Government, invite, for the 4IR Commission and so on, to see what is the possible collaboration in assisting government to move to the next gear, and as far as e-governance is concerned. What do you think of the approach on this?
Yeah, we would be very much keen to support a workshop of that nature from our side. We have the means to be able to make that happen. And having someone like yourself moderate that to support that engagement and come out with something real. And you're right, government is always, they're careful about outsiders, quote unquote, talking about things. But the truth is, to grow, there must be some growing pains, and if criticism comes, is key. I like the point that you mentioned. The 4IR Commission, yes, it was well advertised, etc. But I can tell you currently that document is gathering dust. I've read through the document. It's put together from different pieces of research, but we need to see how all of these things hang together. So the recommendation would be, one, we convene a workshop, of course, blessed by the minister. We involve key entities like these business entities. We invite other private sector organizations. We talk through things. We summarize something, which is, as my colleague Percy mentioned, which is sort of central to 2021 and beyond. Let's say between now and 2025, what's going to happen. And we put that back into the system and see how this all racks together. Absolutely.
I like that. And I think it's a solid way forward, so that this kind of initiative it doesn't become a waste of your resources. We use it to plant a seed, to put up your hand as a corporate to government to say we are willing to help. If we don't do what you are suggesting, it would just end in the air and just ignored. So what we will do is also, of course, as leadership, we'll put together something that will get into the next edition that sums up some of the sentiments that came out of here. Of course, you'll have a chance to look at it. But let me come to you, Prof. Do you think we should add to these three elements suggested by Sunil in terms of way forward? What do you think, Prof?
Yes, I'm very much thankful that we are now reigniting, the initiatives that were started, and we really appreciate also the government that has started these initiatives. But let me caution that the reason why we are still back discussing this is because people are evolving. They are moving from one department to another, from the department to the private, and then those strategies which have been crafted, they don't have that appetite of the home bodies of that time. So I think that this approach that you are bringing back to start taking a pragmatic approach, and I want to add to say that over and above the government stakeholders and the business, we should also add the civil society, organizations as stakeholders, so that all of us, then we started pursuing this, I call it a digital transformation agenda or endeavor that can now accommodate everyone to speak on these matters. Reference was spoken about 4IR. At that time, I know I was part of the discussion. We were grappling with conceptual understanding of 4IR, and even the document, you were able to see that they were just cut and pastes of information that has been coming. I think where we are matured enough to understand what 4IR is. So this forthcoming conference or endeavor that you will be organizing, it will be something that now begin to talk pragmatic approaches, because we have now conceptualized this digital transformation, conceptualized the 4IR, and now with these theoretical lenses, we can then begin to talk about even the policy shift, because that strategy we have been talking about, there is a complete overhaul to begin to have the whole ecosystem of the digital society, so that we don't lose the track of every element of the digital transformation within the ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. That's quite very useful, because Also, you don't want a situation where there are parallel processes. So it may be worth our while to have an initial conversation with the minister and just find out what is being planned. Maybe this thing we're trying to do, someone else has already initiated it. It always helps if the private sector, obviously, who's willing to put some resources to making the thing happen, because it may be that it has been scrapped off a priority list because, you know, of other pressing priorities by government. And if you come on board and say, listen, would like to convene this, we come in as a media partner, they will respect that as well, because in a sense, it will show them to be doing something, even if it may be at a slow pace. So I appreciate those suggestions. Percy, any remarks from your side? Any additions in terms of way forward? What should you be doing to make sure this initiative doesn't die?
So JJ, thank you so much. I think one of the key issues, so there's a thread that I'm picking up. So if we think about it, so the DPSA establishes the e-government strategy, because based on what the minister so eloquently explained to us, it is the functions of the minister in terms of protection of information policies and all of that. The government CIO also sits within the DPSA, but the ICT policy, the ICT policy is being developed by the Department of Communications. So that already shows the whole confusion, and I'm saying confusion very respectfully, but you have one department that is doing an e-government strategy, but you're having another government department that is doing the ICT policy. Yeah. What are the connections between the two documents, and which one is actually driving the direction of government? So that is one thing that I think I would really like to see cleared out urgently, an alignment around the two ministers around where does the ICT policy reside and who drives that. The other thing that we have, and the reason why I'm saying that as well is that I'm saying that selfishly as well, because in a number of conversations that we have with public sector customers, is that they are unable to pivot their organizations into the cloud because there is no policy that determines how they need to engage around cloud solutions. So that is definitely something. If the world is moving this way, but we are hampered around a lack of policy or the lack of clarity in the policy, that is definitely something that needs to happen as well. The second point that I think has to be quite key as well is who owns government data? Because if we're able to clear the issue of who owns government data, we then are able to go through and say, because remember, Sunil mentioned issues around data is gold. And we say the biggest impediment for digital transformation, it's basically the inefficiency of data management across government departments, because each one would be operating in silo. So if we then looking at what the common thread of information and data is, who then owns that data? Because if we're able to do that, is to then, how do we enable individual government entities on access into a government portal? I would really like to engage the minister and the department around the e-services portal that you mentioned, so that we understand around adequacy, what is the real reason for it, and how does government engage, and how do we as citizens engage in that particular portal as well. So those, I think, for me, are two of the key issues that I think we need to engage further on. Yeah, thank you so much, JJ.
You raised a very, very crucial issue about coordination, and I hope you are not surprised, because government generally works in silos.
Yes.
Until something breaks somewhere, and then they will convene what is called an interministerial committee about something, and so on. So sorry for you if you are surprised by it, but we need to sort of roll with the punches. In fact, on our chat box for some of the audience that are joining today, and please feel welcome, Tolu Muzi said you should have invited Sita, because anything that is IT in government goes through them, and they may be able to provide some answers. Now, already bang in the middle of what you are saying, you're not even talking about Sita. You're just talking about the two departments, right? So that bears your point out. There's another comment from Mandla, who's joining today, says the minister was referring to the first version of the e-government policy. In fact, in November 2017, Cabinet approved a revised e-government strategy as part of the national e-strategy through the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies. So, you know, the PC4IR was established and provided a report and recommendations. This calls for an update of the 2017 Cabinet approved strategy. Despite that, there are numerous initiatives taking place, for instance, digital skills development that involves both public and private sectors, updating the public service regulations to deal with data management in the public service, business process modernization across the public sector, and many other initiatives. Now that throws the cat amongst the pigeons there. You make another initiative, then you are told, no, there are many others. So it may be worth a while as a way forward from here to do, even if it's a basic just desktop, study of what is out there, what's happening, what are the parallel things that may be happening, so that when we convene that in Daba, we invite all these people because they may also be itching to coordinate with others, and we can create a platform that brings everybody into a melting pot to say, okay, we're not saying nothing is happening, we're just saying a lot is happening that is not talking to each other. So those are some of the comments. There's another comment here that says, thank you so much, but please engage government school rigorously because it's either to the benefit or the destruction of government or to be successful. And I think there's someone in the panel who did mention the issue of, I think it was Sunil, the school of government to really come to the party. It may well be that we actually co-host this thing with the school of government. So it's seen as a capacity building thing rather than private sector imposing anything and so on. You know how government can be defensive. So I'm quite grateful for those comments. Mpho, do you have a remark to add on the way forward before I summarize? As the time is ticking, I think we've got about 15 minutes left now.
Thanks, Dr. JJ. So I think my closing remark would be, we need to allow for platforms of educating our government colleagues on what the art of the possible looks like. I think a lot of the time they get fed information from multiple different sources, and they're not able to actually dissect what it is that it means in their context. As the minister said, we need fit for purpose solutions, fit for purpose technologies that are addressing our needs of today as opposed to what the future may look like. So I think from my perspective, at least from my aspect, is we need more engaging forums like this, perhaps ones that are more directed at educating different members of the government where we work in the different segments, in ensuring or empowering the technology of what digital actually looks like today and what it means in the context of government, so we're able to make better informed decisions around the outcomes in which we'd like to see technology empowering or at least changing. Thanks.
Mpho, that's quite excellent. I don't have to tell you that in initiatives of this nature, a once-off situation doesn't work. I know that it's expensive to convene these things. We need to, cast our eyes 5 years from now to say, if we did these things and they are targeted. So in this case, for example, we are saying we're going to invite IT, communications,
We lost you there, JJ.
I mean, even if you're in 2017, you're already out by 5 years. Forget about 2002. Just talk about 2017. Technology has advanced so rapidly, and people have adapted. There's innovation following the COVID. So you could have a whole workshop of adaptation to say, how will a post-COVID recovery look like in as far as IT is concerned? That's a full topic. Just on a webinar alone on that. So I think we need to put our heads together to see whether, besides calling an indaba whose outcomes are going to go through 10 committees before they are made real, we could actually influence some thought leaders in the public and the private sectors to take the 4IR issue serious. I mean, I know the report that Sunil was talking about, the 4IR. I think it came out a year ago. I don't think it has been engaged with in any serious manner. Nothing stops us from reaching out to Professor Marawa and say, come and tell us what you guys were doing in the 4IR as a webinar on its own. And then empower other people who may not even have bothered to read a very thick document, who may have never bothered to read it. And by the time they read it, it will be out of date because technology is not waiting for that document. It's advancing every day. So important for that, and I hope it's a seed we can plant to see whether, instead of this being a once-off thing or an annual thing, we do it even if it's every quarter, you know, and get speakers from different angles of IRR and use it as an educational thing. Remember, once we have recorded like this, we could also now circulate it on social media and reduce it into print so it doesn't get lost. And it doesn't mean that you have to physically be at a particular webinar to get the information. We can circulate it. We can create databases where we circulate it to various databases that we share between yourselves and ourselves through our many publications. I'm happy to leave it at this because I think it was more than just a webinar. I think it became a meeting of what are we gonna do going forward, which is what I prefer with these things rather than as a simple talk shop. So if I can ask maybe Sunil to close for us in the final remarks, and I think we should be happy in terms of what was put through the discussion. If you have any burning thing that you think we left out, you can indicate at this point. But let me give Sunil to give us a round of remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Tabane, fellow colleagues, panelists, Professor Kanyane, Cape Media, of course, Cabo, my colleague, our marketing team. I think this was an amazing session because there is so much that came out of the discussion that the minister gave us for currency, which is think about right now, and then futuristically. And JJ, I like the fact that we can evolve this beyond this conversation, which is the webinar, and have something tangible come out of it. As you said, maybe it's a quarterly thing that we could potentially do with key stakeholders and having one or two of my colleagues engaged with that. I also do think that we should be mindful that government, you've got so much happening in government and people are threatened by everything and anything in their positions that it might make more sense to have some kind of webinar that talks to this and having some government representatives on it and to build this as we go along where they are wholly part of the process as opposed to something that we then shackle on them. And then last but not least, I want to thank the entire team behind leadership that put this together, that gave us the opportunity to, and so much of the minister's time, especially on a day like this where she has to go to Parliament, she's made herself available and has been totally candid with us about the upside of things that have happened, what the challenges are in the public sector, and opening up to say private sector can and will play a continued role in the evolution of the digital transformation of government. So there's a place for everyone to play a role in this. Ultimately, it's about South Africa and Africa. We want to make sure that South Africa and Africa in general takes its rightful place within this digital economy. Otherwise, we'll be left behind. And our children will be asking us, what did we do when the entire globe was moving into the digital era? What were our steps we have taken? Let us not hang our heads in shame. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate all of the remarks, and thank you for all of you to make your time available, and also some incisive remarks that we got from here. We'll summarize obviously the way forward, and I'm not sure whose head is going to be on the neck from your side to make sure these things happen. Sunil, maybe yours must be on the neck because you're close.
Yeah, it was.
Mine will be on the neck on this side. I will
Sure.
reach out to you, and then we can almost have a roadmap, because with these things, if you leave it too long and so on, before you know it, will be March next year and nothing would have happened. And I think with government, we want to strike while it's hot. Minister is very excited. She just sent me a text that you say, I must thank all of you for the opportunity, and she wants to see some follow up to this. So at least, if it comes from both sides, it will happen. We don't have to chase it down the road to make things happen. So thank you so much for everybody, the team that put it all together from both sides of yourselves as SAP Africa, as well as leadership and Cape Media. I think this is where I can adjourn the meeting until we meet again and follow this up. Thank you so much for your time, and all the best. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon.